All right, everyone, welcome to How to Prioritize Everything. We're going to start today with a little chat about MySpace Tom. For those of you who might not know who MySpace Tom is, he was the founder of social media network MySpace. Way before the days of TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, and Facebook, MySpace was the social media of my youth. There was a couple of things on MySpace that made it stand out. One of them was this top friends feature. It allowed you to, only 8 positions to rank all of your friends on the platform. And so my friends and I, little angsty preteens, we would take out our little journals and start to order everyone into lists. And inevitably, someone wouldn't make the cut because we only had 8 spots after all. So Allison would rank Trisha, but Trisha wouldn't rank Allison, and so on and so forth. The thing that this made me realize was that we all use different criteria to prioritize things. In this friendship, Allison and Trisha clearly were not on the same page as to what friendship meant to them, or what those criteria were to make it to the top 8. So today we're going to talk about ways to get people to buy into your priority list, whether it's a top 8 friends list for MySpace or your tech SEO items that need to be implemented. We're going to use numbers and variables. We're going to start with some really basic math, some addition, and go all the way into custom scripting formulas in Google Apps scripts. So hopefully you'll be able to take some of these away immediately after the presentation and prioritize your, very long task lists. If you're here today, you obviously want to learn how to prioritize things, but we're going to start with the why to really make sure that when you create your prioritization models, you're on the same page with your organization. So there's 3 main things that people like to prioritize. For the first is time. That's usually the most common. That's why probably a lot of you are here today. There's only 24 hours in a day, and there are an endless amount of tasks that you could be doing as an SEO. The second is buy-in. So, if you're having trouble getting your boss to think that, something is a really good thing to do, if you're having trouble with the engineering team implementing some of your tech SEO recommendations or convincing a client that these are really important things to do, that's where buy-in comes in. And then the last is alignment. So in our top 8 friends example, if Trisha and Allison didn't both rank each other on their top 8 friends, they're clearly using different criteria for their prioritization lists. And that's where alignment comes into play. It really helps us align our priorities and our variables that we use for prioritization. So if your organization is using as their North Star, a 10% increase in traffic, your variables and your prioritization list as an SEO need to align with those ultimately. So there are a lot of different prioritization models that already exist in the world that were created by very smart individuals. So before we reinvent the wheel, we're going to talk a little bit about what exists out there in the world today. There are 4 things that we're going to talk about, starting with value and versus complexity, a simple matrix, and going all the way up into Rice scoring. And then after that, we'll talk about some custom scripting. So the first, by far the simplest version of prioritization is a matrix. Just a scatter plot, taking your things. So here we have 7 things that are in a to-do list, and we are mapping them on a XY plot, where we have complexity on the bottom and value on the other axis. And as things increase in value and decrease in complexity, we want to focus on those things that are in that white circle. Those are the things that are going to provide the biggest impact and are probably going to take the least amount of time. And so if we can do a lot of those things, we can see a lot of success. The red X on the bottom right quadrant, those are the things that we do not want to do. We definitely don't want to start with them, and we might not ever want to do them. They provide very low value and are really, really hard and complex. So if you have tons and tons of things, way more than 7, this scatter plot is going to get really crowded really fast. And in those situations, we can use a simple math formula, an unweighted score, to pretty much do the same thing. So the unweighted score here has a priority score formula that is literally just adding up the variables. So variable 1 plus variable 2. In this case, we're going to be using the same exact variables, value and complexity. In this case, complexity is going to have a negative score because it's a bad thing. So it's going to be value minus complexity. We're using the exact same numbers as well that I used on the scatter plot, so we can see if this is getting prioritized in the same way. So literally just summing up those two things. And we get that thing 3 and thing 5 should be prioritized based on that final score if we were to order that from A to Z. This was the same thing we saw in our scatter plot. So we can see that the unweighted scoring is very similar, but maybe a lot easier to do at scale if you just want to, drag down that formula in the spreadsheet and have it for like 1,000, 100 different things. So, Mary, these things are not that simple. I understand, we have oftentimes our value and our complexity are not just, apples to apples. Sometimes we really want to prioritize the value that something brings and the complexity isn't as dramatic. And in that case, we can do a weighted scoring. So a very similar formula, we're still adding things, but now we're actually going to multiply by the weight of each variable. So if complexity is way more important than value, we can weight complexity higher. And vice versa, the other way around. So this is kind of like, in college when your chemistry final was worth 50% of your grade, and all of those other small tasks were weighted less. The table that we are looking at here is actually very, very similar to the unweighted table. But up on the top in red, you can see the custom weighting that each variable is going to have. So value, in this case, is going to be weighted at 70% and complexity at 30. So we really are going to put a lot of weight onto whatever scores are in the value column. And in the same way of that formula, we're going to now multiply everything down the column by that weight, and then we're going to add the final scores together. And when we do that, we can see that thing 3 and thing 5 are still getting prioritized, but this time we also have thing 7 in the mix because, thing 7, we're reducing the amount of weight that we're putting on its complexity, and we're increasing the weight of its value. So it actually ends up getting, way more up there in the list. So those are, some really basic math things. We're just using the thing in those examples. It's not really in action yet. And so when we're talking about prioritization and action, I'm going to show you what one of the most common prioritization scores, which is the RICE scoring. This was developed by messaging software company Intercom, and they developed RICE as their own internal prioritization model to figure out what should be on their roadmap, what features to ship, how their product management team talks to their engineering team, and it's really taken on a life of its own. I see many different development teams use RICE scoring to figure out what should be in their sprints, and using this as an SEO can definitely help you speak the same language as those development teams and get your tasks, all of your tech SEO things implemented because they can kind of fit right into the current sprint cycle. So a little bit more complex than just variable value and complexity. We have these 4 components in RICE. The first one is reach, which is how many customers is this actually going to impact. One page template might be used across 50,000 pages in a site, and it's going to reach 1 million customers. That's going to have a very different score than something that is only going to affect 500 customers. The impact is usually something like conversion rate, a variable that you want the outcome to change. And the next one is confidence. So how optimistic are you about all the other variables? Are you really sure that this is going to reach that many customers? Are you really sure that it's actually going to have this suggested impact? And then the last one is effort. So actually how many hours or days, whatever time variable you want there, how long will it actually take to implement? And so when we do all of our things in this list and we map out their reach, impact, confidence, and effort, we can get a score in a very similar way. And arranging our, especially tech SEO recommendations in this way can help us, get into that sprint queue because we are speaking that same language. They're going to see scores very similar to this for other tasks, product things that need to get updated. And so it's a really powerful tool in that sense. So now, switching gears, those are all of the formulas that have come before. Now we're going to talk about some of the proprietary stuff that we do at wPromote. We have a lot of, prioritization tools, and we like to use Google Apps Scripts for them. It's a little bit fancier version, but in its truest sense, it is very similar to the addition and division types of formulas that we've just seen. Using Google Apps Scripts allows us to scale prioritization way, way, way more. It also allows us to have, variable formulas. So things can change and people can go in and adjust them to their liking. So Google Apps Scripts, if you don't know, is a JavaScript-based scripting platform, and it natively integrates to all of Google's products. So super easy if you're already using Google. We're not going to talk about all the nitty-gritty details of scripting today. This is definitely more of a theoretical conversation. But if you are going to use the template that we're sharing today, to activate Google Apps Scripts, if you are following along, you're going to have to sign your soul away to Google and authorize all the scripts. So if you just follow the steps on the screen, you should be good. So like I said, we're not going into the details of what the script actually looks like at every time or how to build a script. But if you are super interested in that, definitely check out Ben Collins' intro to Google Apps Scripts, great resource. And we'll be providing this so you can take a little look behind the scenes throughout the presentation as well. So for our first Google Apps Scripts, we're going to talk about what to eat for dinner. And we're not using SEO data here yet to help everyone understand the concept of prioritization before we get into all of the numbers that we're really used to. So keeping an open mind here. So I have listed all of the things I might have for dinner on the left-hand side, and I've picked 4 variables: likability, spoilability, time to cook, and nutrition. Every time I want to prioritize something, I have to pick these types of variables. And it can be very overwhelming picking variables, but at the end of the day, it's all relative to your prioritization model. You just got to make sure that you're consistent once you've picked those variables, and you rate, your likability for each of those things in the list in a similar scale. And truly nothing matters. Like, this is your prioritization model. You can do whatever you want with it. There's no right or wrong answer. But as long as you're consistent, and you're also consistent across the organization. So in the beginning, like we talked about the reasons for prioritization, you want to make sure that your variables actually align somehow back to the company's chief business objective. That way you'll get a lot better buy-in to whatever outcome you have from your prioritization list. So picking our variables, we've picked likability for one of them. And we then have a weighting tab. So in that sheet, if you're following along, you'll see that weighting tab, and there's these 4 different buckets, ranges of those numbers that we saw in the first dinner table. So we use averages and standard deviations to develop these buckets automatically. So no matter what scale you're using for your variables, whether I'm rating from 0 to 100 or 0 to 5, like I am here, we'll always have these kind of synonymous buckets. We're not going to get into the details of standard deviation today, but that's what we're using to create these buckets. We're using the minimum to the first standard deviation, and then that to the average, and the average to the standard deviation above, and then that to the maximum. And then on the right-hand column, you can see in red, we're giving each of those ranges a weight. So if something falls, within that minimum range, no matter which actual number it is, if it's within that range, it's going to get that score. And this allows us to be a lot more flexible and dynamic with our scoring. And the script actually works in the same way as those weighted and unweighted scores that we were talking about earlier. We're adding up all the weights, and then in this case, we're going to divide by the number of variables. So this should look, very similar. And what's so cool about the script is that it actually goes between the tabs for you, and it goes and it says, okay, TikTok pasta has this level of likability. I'm going to go over to the weight table now, and I'm going to see what that number falls within which range, and I'm going to go and look for that weight that's given to that range. And it's going to take that, put it in the score, the formula, and it's going to go down to the next column. Okay, now we're in time to cook. How long does it take to cook? Go to that weights tab, figure out how that should be weighted, and back and forth. So as a human, there's a lot of room for error to do that, and there's a lot of thinking and switching tabs. And so using Google Apps Scripts allows us to just have the computer do this for us. And that's kind of what it looks like in the script. So we have an if statement and looking through each of those different ranges there. That's what the weight card looks like in that weight tab. And so instead of hard coding this into the code, we're actually allowing this to be built dynamically in the sheet, so that if I were, to pop in and decide I was going to change, likability was actually going to be out of 100 now, I was going to change a bunch of them, those buckets would be dynamically changed in the sheet. And, someone doesn't have to be super technical to go and change the Google Apps Script. And so we can try it out. So if you guys are following along in the sheet, you can go to the script element that's been added to the master nav, and then go to that drop down and click the numeric score. So if you played with any of the variables, you should be able to run this, click authorize and all of those things, and get some different scores. But based on what I had added into my table, it looks like I am having takeout leftovers for dinner tonight. So if that wasn't cool enough for you guys, we can add some words in to our script. A lot of times numbers aren't going to be enough. We want to add labels to things. Maybe I want to prioritize Italian for dinner or American food. Here I've added hot and cold as a variable, and then sweet and savory. And so in the same way that we're looking at buckets for numbers, for words, we're going to do a match. So the formula is going to go back and forth between the tabs, and it's going to say, if this column contains the word hot, I'm going to go to the weight sheet and see how that is weighted. And so our weight sheet looks a little bit different for non-numeric variables, but it works pretty much in the same way. And the formula is actually the same. It's adding up all the weights and dividing by the variables. So that is all great and fine in theory, but how does this work in practice? We are all SEOs here, or in some manner digital marketers. So there are a lot of things we could be adding in for our prioritization as digital marketers. We're going to talk about keyword data here. No matter what tool you use, you're probably going to have things like your current position, monthly search volume, keyword difficulty. All of those number scores seem very similar across the platforms. And then we can add word-based non-numeric variables like, does it have a featured snippet? Is it branded or not? And this works exactly in the same way. It's the same script as the, TikTok pasta, what I should have for dinner. And we have that score in that right-hand column based on those same exact things. So there are so many different things that you could prioritize and use as variables as a, SEO. There's some examples on the screen here. I think one of the most important things that I like to add in is the business priority metrics. So these help us align our chief business goal with our priority, scripts. And things like what the product category is that this keyword falls within, those can be really important because sometimes some product category is going to be way more profitable and need to be prioritized. At WPromote, we have quite a few of these prioritization models at play. One is for prioritizing which competitor gaps we should fill. Another is which topics we should write about from a content marketing perspective, deciding which keywords are best to track for a certain business, and last but not least, the tech SEO implementations, which ones should happen now, next, and later. So if something in your life is a long list, it can definitely be prioritized as long as you pick some variables, weight them, and use one of these prioritization models. I hope today you guys can take away at least one of these prioritization models, maybe starting with the scatter plot value complexity, and start mapping out some of your tasks across there. If you enjoyed the presentation today, we're sharing that template sheet where you can play around with some of the scripts and different formulas. Like I had mentioned, Ben Collins, great resource for Google Apps Scripts. Also, big fan of agency automators. If you are into this kind of automation, definitely check them out. They've got some other really great examples of SEOs automating their lives and trying to make them easier. So thank you so much for joining us today. Definitely hit me up on Twitter at @TheMaryMary if you have any questions or if you've tried out any of these things and you want to share. Definitely excited to hear from y'all.